What is up, guys? Tonight we're going to be starting the timing belt installation for my LX470. I've not done this before, so we're just going to kind of dive right into it. While we're in there, we're going to be replacing everything that we can maintenance-wise while we're taking the stuff out and we're in there anyways. So that's going to include water pump, any of the soft seals that are accessible, upper and lower radiator hoses, thermostat, and flush the coolant while we're in there as well. So the first thing I'm going to do, because it's a truck and it's higher up, I'm going to pull all the wheels off and just set it on the lift, so this way I can drop it down as low as possible, and we'll start away from the underside up. So removing the belly pan, draining the coolant, and then we'll start tackling things from the top of the engine bay. So let's begin. So that's not me peeing, that's the remaining coolant coming out of the radiator. So we're gonna start working our way in through the top of the engine bay now, which includes taking the engine cover off. We're gonna take the air intake assembly out. The cam gear covers are gonna come off. I think we gotta take this water neck off, remove our upper and lower radiator hoses, unbolt the radiator assembly and fan. This has a fan clutch, so we're gonna have to disengage it via these bolts that are on it right here. So we're just gonna get all this stuff out of the way and give ourselves as much room to work as possible. Also take the serpentine belt off, which is another item that we will be replacing. This looks like the thermostat housing right here. We're gonna be putting a new thermostat in it while we're in here. And even though these radiator hoses don't look too bad, I bought brand new OEM Toyota radiator hoses, just because that's just how I roll. So let's start making some room. So for the fan clutch here, we're just going to use a long 12 millimeter headed open wrench here, or not open wrench, but closed wrench, but something that's thin that can get down there. I have these, I think these are Snap-on or Matco, Snap-on. These come in quite handy. This is 10 and 12. I have a 14 and 17, and I have a 17 and a 19, but it works perfectly in this situation because you can just get it right down in here. And I'm going to use a pry bar to stop the fan clutch from spinning. These aren't that tight, so you don't have to put that much pressure on it. But we're going to crack them loose, and I'm going to unthread them by hand. All right, guys, so we're gonna take a little moment here to kind of explain this next bit. It's pretty tricky, and everything that I'm looking at online doesn't really give you a clear indication of what exactly you have to do just because of how tight it is. So we have to take off the fan bracket there. There's a couple bolts that are sheared with the AC compressor. So if you look in here, let me see if I get this on camera. You can see I have a wrench right up in there. Sorry, it's hard to do this with the flashlight in the camera. Okay, there we go. So that wrench is coming down from the engine bay, just behind the dipstick tube. It's a 14mm headed bolt. We're gonna loosen that because that is the back bolt for the AC compressor here. And then while this is up in here, just past behind the oil filter, we have to get, I know this one for sure, and maybe the second one also, but these have to come off. These bolts have to come off as well. And then that's gonna allow us ultimately to just kind of pivot the AC compressor back as we take out the fan bracket. I know it sucks. I'm sorry, I wish there was some better way to show this to you guys, but you're just gonna kind of have to feel around in there and make sure that you're grabbing the right bolts to get that stuff off. But that's it. Let's carry on. And I forgot one. So here's the AC compressor again. That bolt right up there is the one that has to come down, and then to correct these, there's that one in the front, and then if you go just behind it, following that little S bracket right there, there's another 14mm headed one that's below the compressor that needs to come out. You're not going to be able to see it at this angle, but it's there. Okay, so now with the AC compressor loose for those bolts that I showed you guys, we can go ahead and continue to take off the fan bracket here, and we're just gonna kind of pivot this out of the way so we can pull this out. All right, so that's everything out of the way that we need now, so we can actually start tackling the timing belt itself. Looking at our cam gear here, we have a notch, which is what we're gonna line up with this notch here for top dead center, and the same thing with here as well. I'm gonna do that by spinning the crank pulley, and I believe the notch here on the crank will line up right at 0 once those are lined up. So I'm gonna spin the motor a little bit, and we'll see what we end up with. Okay, so here we have the motor set to top dead center, so 0 degrees on our crank pulley there, and you can see our timing marks here, again the bar on the gear, and then there's also a white notch right here to line up with the timing mark here, and then the same thing on this side. The crank has 2 threaded holes in it on the top and the bottom of the pulley here. This is for a crank tool to hold it in place while you untorque or loosen up the crank bolt. So I'm gonna set that up now and crack this free. Okay, so I caved in, bought a crank pulley holder for these Toyota Lexus V8 engines. I went on Amazon, $68 later via Prime, and this is what I got. I couldn't break it loose with my impact, and I didn't have a crank pulley tool that quite fit this crank pulley, so prompted me. I just went and bought it. I figured I'd rather just have it than be left stranded. So let's continue. Basically, there's slots on it that you can thread these bolts into, and then we're going to use a 1/2-inch breaker bar to put in here, and that will allow us to hold this while we break the crank bolt itself free. I believe the torque spec is about 180 foot-pounds, so that's probably why I can't get it with my impact. This is just a little bit too juicy. So let's give this a whirl. So this bastard's on there pretty damn tight, so I'm gonna use a big old cheater pipe here to give me a little extra leverage. Oh, yes. There we go. All right. Let's carry on. Alright guys, so we're going to be tightening down the water pump bolts now. The little nut that's on there, that gets torqued to 12 foot-pounds. And then the rest of them is 15 foot-pounds. I'm going to start with the little nut first. And I used a little bit of grease where the water pump covers the O-ring off of that pipe off of the motor, just so there's no drag or binding. Okay, there's 12. I'm going to do everything else to 15 now. Okay, new water pump's installed. Okay, so next I'm going to change my pulleys out. I'm going to start with the tensioner. Interesting enough, when I took the old tensioner out, the casting was broken on it. And it just came out in pieces like this. But here's the new one. And we'll be reusing the existing bolt for it. Alright guys, so here we have my new Toyota OEM timing belt. The belt is actually marked, which is a little bit new to me versus other cars that I've done, but you could see right cam, left cam, and then on the bottom here we have our crank. So we're going to line these up with the timing notches. So I already have the cam set at top dead center here, so we're going to wind up with this, with these two notches lining up with the notches on the gears and the notches on the timing covers. And then there's a notch on the bottom of the crank gear there for the bottom mark here. So I'm going to get it started. We're going to line up the bottom and then we're going to pull it up, and then we're going to finish off by timing it at the top. And I'll be using 17mm wrench to move the gear a 1/2 or so if I need to adjust it a little bit. And once we're all done with that, we're going to reinstall our timing tensioner, which I bought a new one because mine was all old and poopy rusty. So I'm sure that this still works, but it's just one of those things that's easy enough to change while we're in there, so I figured might as well do it. So we'll see how it goes timing the motor up. Alright guys, so now that our timing marks are lined up, we're going to take our new tensioner here. You can see I showed you the top 2 gears, left and right cam gears. So just take another quick glance here down at our bottom. We still see that this mark, I know it's hard to see with this lighting, is lined up with the belt. These two cover over that circle in the pulley there. And then our ones on top are lining up with these marks here. So we have our slack on the tensioner side. We're gonna put the new tensioner in. I'm gonna spin the motor by hand for 2 revolutions and then make sure that everything lines back up top dead center. And if it is, we're good with the belt and we can start putting everything back on. Okay, so now with our belt timed up good, we're going to pull the pin from the tensioner and let it tension the slack right here. There we go, nice and snug. So now we're going to start putting our timing covers back on and just kind of working our way up from the bottom up. fellas, we are done with the timing belt install. She's purring like a kitten. I'm just letting her warm up. I was burping the air out of the radiator. I'm gonna wait until the thermostat opens up, new thermostat, and make sure that I get coolant. This boat still feels cold. It hasn't opened yet, so this one I can definitely feel is warm because it's taken from the motor. But we are gonna wrap this one up here. All in all, this wasn't too bad of a timing belt job. Timing this motor was pretty easy. I wanna say it's like easier than cars like the Miata, whereas like cars like the Miata, doing a timing belt is probably a little bit easier just because stuff is a little bit more accessible. Working over the truck was definitely difficult, especially trying to film what I was doing. So if you guys have any questions or you get stumped with anything on here, leave it in the description below or the comments below, and I will do whatever I can to help you guys out. But other than that, I'm glad to have done this now. Even though the belt that I took out looked like it was barely worn, I just want to have that peace of mind and not have to worry about it as I'm driving it around. So it's almost ready for winter duties. Next step in the project, we're going to replace the heater tees, and we're going to start doing the undercoating and rust protection before we like put it in for the winter snow. So that's it for this one, guys. Thank you all so very much for tuning in. Till next time, done.